Hello everyone, I'm the CCG Collector, and this is part 1 of my video series on how to play the Middle Earth CCG. As with all of my longer videos, I'll include timestamps of important parts in the description. The Middle Earth CCG is a very involved, very complex game that's in many ways more like a tabletop RPG than a collectible card game. But it's also quite a bit of fun once you get the hang of it, and well worth learning if you can find someone to play against. Thematically, you are one of the 5 wizards in Middle Earth, gathering factions and allies to resist Sauron. In the game, this is represented by marshalling points, which you obtain by recruiting factions and allies, controlling powerful items, and defeating Sauron's minions. The goal is to accumulate the most marshalling points by the end of the game. This tutorial series will cover the starter deck rules. It's a simplified rules system that allows you to play the game with just a wizard starter deck. It won't cover any additional rules from the expansions, and it doesn't even reflect the full complexity available in the base set. Also, there are additional rules for tournaments, which I won't address here. However, all that said, this is still a legitimate and accepted way to play the game, and it is one of the best ways to start with the Middle Earth CCG. Now this video, part 1, will cover the different card types in the game and how to build your Middle Earth deck. In the Middle Earth CCG, there are several different kinds of cards, but for your first game, you'll only need to know about 4 of them. Characters, resources, hazards, and sites. Now, I'll only summarize each of these card types here. As we get into actual gameplay, I'll go into the specifics a little bit more. Anyway, our first cards are characters. Here I have Bilbo and Boromir. Characters form your adventuring party. This is the group responsible for collecting marshalling points. Each character does have marshalling points of their own, so if Bilbo survives till the end of the game, he'll be worth 2 marshalling points for you. If Boromir does, he'll be worth 1. Characters also have mind, represented by the number in the white head here, and influence, represented by the number in the white hand. Now these values serve to limit how many characters you may control at once. Obviously you can't have a party full of Aragorns. In the lower left you'll have prowess and body. Boromir has 6 prowess, Bilbo only has 1. But Bilbo seems is a little bit tougher with 9 body as opposed to Boromir's 7. These are used in combat and determine how well a character does there. Each character also has skills and a race underneath the image. Bilbo is a scout and a sage hobbit, so hobbit is his race, scout and sage are his skills. Boromir is simply a warrior Dunedain. Again, Dunedain is his race, warrior is his skill. Finally, each character has a corruption modifier. Certain powerful items, like the One Ring, can wrest control of your characters from you, leaving them to wander alone, unable to influence the game on your behalf. Some characters, like Bilbo with his +4 corruption modifier, are particularly resistant to this. Others, such as Boromir with his -1, are more susceptible. Notice too that there is no play cost anywhere on these cards. No card in the Middle Earth CCG ever has an explicit cost to play, like mana, force, energy, or anything like that. You simply have to meet the stated requirements of each card. For non-site cards, like characters, this is always in bold at the start of the card's game text. Characters tend to only have a single requirement to play. In this case, it's unique. This just means that once Bilbo here is in play or eliminated, your opponent can't play a Bilbo of his own, and you can't play a second one. Next up are resources. Resources represent the various sources of aid for your characters. This includes items, allies or factions, or it might simply be an event of some sort that represents a favorable occurrence. So the first resource is Sword of Gondolin, and this is an item. Again, it has the marshalling points in the upper left-hand corner. This is the amount it's worth at the end of the game, if one of your characters controls it. You'll also see that this one has modifiers to prowess and body, +2 and nothing. Corruption. The Sword of Gondolin has 2 corruption points. Not a huge number, but it will affect your characters throughout the game. And you'll notice too that unlike in many other card games, the card layout stays the same across the different card types. Marshalling points are always in the same place, combat modifiers are always in the same place, corruption modifiers are always in the same place, and so on. You'll also notice that cards often have redundancy for the sake of clarity. For example, here, the +2 prowess is shown as a simple number in the bottom left, but it's restated in the game text, along with the qualifier. So, warrior only, +2 to prowess, to a maximum of 8. So if your character has 7 prowess, this will only take him up to 8. But of course, if he has 6, it'll also take him up to 8. Another type of resource is a faction. Now this faction is the Ents of Fanghorn. Again, they have marshalling points. These are worth 3. And they have the requirements. Unique, again, and playable at Wellinghall, which is a site probably in Fanghorn. And this particular faction says if the influence check is greater than 9, you can play it. So factions are not characters. They do not fight for you or anything like that. But they are, when your characters go to their home site, they can recruit the faction, and then you'll get the marshalling points that the faction is worth. And finally, we have resource events, like Risky Blow. Events either last for a single instance, and those are short events. They might last for a whole turn, which are long events, or they can last until they're canceled, and those would be permanent events. Not too much on this card, but again, like all the others, you have the requirements. Warrior only against 1 strike, and the effect, +3 prowess, -1 to body. So this card can only be played on a warrior, like Boromir, who, as we remember, is a warrior, and only takes effect for the duration of 1 strike against him. But for that 1 strike, he gets a little more attack while sacrificing some of his toughness. Hazards are the opposite of resources. They're obstructions you play to inhibit your opponent's characters. Unlike resources, these have only 2 categories: creatures and events. This first creature, this first hazard, is Ambusher, and this is a creature. These also have marshalling points, all creatures do, but in this case, they're the marshalling points that your opponent receives if they defeat the character. Resources give you marshalling points for playing them. Hazards give your opponent marshalling points for defeating them. Creatures also have location requirements. Different creatures inhabit different locales. Ambusher is found in cities and developed regions, represented by these towers here, while Old Man Willow keeps to the woods, which are represented by these trees. Again, I'll go into the meaning and the specifics of those a little bit later. And finally, creatures have prowess and body. Most creatures don't have any body value, so if you defeat them, that's it. However, stronger ones might be able to survive an attack or 2. And then, of course, you have all the restrictions, the attack details, and so on. Then you have hazard events. Now, this is Awakened Denizens, and it is a long event. Remember, that means it lasts for the duration of a turn. And when I say turn, I mean it lasts for the turn that the card is played and the turn after. So Awakened Denizens will affect both your opponent on the turn you play this and you on the turn following, and then it will be discarded. Now, hazard, because you play your hazards on your opponent's turn, they take effect first on your opponent's turn, then on yours. Resource long events take effect first on your turn, because that's when you play them, and then they also aid your opponent in the following turn. Now, this card you'll see says cannot be duplicated. Now, that's the hazard or the resource version of unique. It means that you can only have one in your deck, but it also means that only one of these can be in play at a time. So you cannot play Awakened Denizens, and then your opponent would not be able. If you played Awakened Denizens, your opponent would not be able to play a copy of his own to double the attacks and then double them again. This is why it cannot be duplicated. And finally, we have sites. Now, sites are the source of marshalling points. Each character, item, faction, and ally has a specific site or sites at which it may be played, and hazard creatures are similarly restricted in where they may attack. Each site is in a particular region. Bag End, for example, is in the Shire, which is right there, while the Barrow Downs are in Cardolan, which is that region right there. Under the standard rules of the game, you draw your own path through regions as you travel between sites, but with the starter rules I'm explaining today, the regions you pass through are defined on the site cards themselves. Again, I'll explain more about that and what those different icons mean a little bit later. Sites do come in two primary flavors. Friendly sites, like Bag End, which are the source of allies and aids, and dangerous sites that are guarded by enemies, but that also contain treasure or other things of value. Sites in the latter category, such as the Barrow Downs, list the rewards that can be found here, like minor and major items, along with the default guardians of that treasure, which is, in this case, undead. Most sites also mention the nearest haven Rivendell, nearest haven Rivendell. Havens are a special type of site that act as waypoints between all the others. There are 4 havens: Rivendell, Lorien, Edhland, and the Grey Havens. If you want your characters to explore sites that are more distant, you have to travel through havens to get there. Finally, every site has two numbers in the lower left. When a player travels to a site, he draws the amount of cards listed in the white box, in this case 2, while his opponent draws the number of cards in the black box. Although it is highly recommended to have a pair of dice when playing the Middle Earth CCG, the game does offer a provision in case you don't have one. Each card has a small dark number in the right side, 4, 7, 5, and so on. If you need to make a roll and you don't have dice, simply draw a card, use the value printed there, and then discard the card afterward. Now, keep in mind, these numbers are not truly balanced. Some card games they are. This is not one of them. So there is no guarantee of randomness if you choose that approach. For that reason, it is very much encouraged to use dice. Now, although the Middle Earth starter decks are not pre-constructed, and they contain a random mix of cards, they do each have a fixed pack. There are 5 different fixed packs, 5 different, that can be included in the starter decks, and they include wizards, resources, sites, characters, and so on. So they'll offer a little bit of synergy in your deck. But beyond that, you're kind of stuck with what you've got. And that's the nature of a random starter deck. So not every deck is going to be the greatest. It's not going to have an underlying strategy, but every starter deck is playable right out of the box. Now, your complete deck consists of 3 parts: hazards and resources, characters, like these guys, and sites, which are right here. Now, your site pile will always be separate from the other cards, but once the game begins, your characters, hazards, and resources will all form a single play deck. In most cases, you may have up to 3 copies of each individual card in your deck. However, any card with the text unique or cannot be duplicated is limited to a single instance. Your site deck may contain any number of haven cards, which are like Rivendell and Edhland. They're indicated by this white star. But every other site in the deck must be unique. And that's because when you visit a site, you get the resource or, you get the faction or the item that's there, then the site is used up and you may no longer visit it. However, havens, you can always go back to. Now, no matter which specific cards you put in it, your base deck must contain an equal number of hazards and resources, and you can kind of see that reflected here as I thumb through the deck. The deck must contain between 25 and 50 of each, and it must contain the same amount of each. Now, since we're using a random starter deck, there's no guarantee that we'll have 25 hazards and 25 resources, so just include as many as you can while keeping the number even. If my starter deck had 22 hazards and 25 resources, for example, then we just use 22 of each, and we put out 3 of the resources to not be used in the game. The standard rules do allow for a sideboard in addition to these cards here, but in the starter game, we won't use one. You'll also need a pair of 6-sided dice. I'm using official Middle Earth CCG dice here, but any dice will do. So let's get ready to play. Let's start the game. Now that you've got your base play deck and your site deck, you're ready to add characters to the mix. Select your starting company, choose 1 to 5 non-wizards, and place them face down in front of you. Your opponent does the same, and then you'll reveal them simultaneously. So let's do that now. The total combined mind attributes of your characters must be 20 or less. So we've got Aragorn here with 9, Faramir here with 5, so that's 14, and Boromir with 4, which takes us up to 18. Our opponent has 9, 4 is 13, 3 is 16, 4 is 20. Now characters are all unique, so the players may not start with the same ones. If any of your characters match, in this case Boromir and Boromir, each player must take that card, put it in their play deck instead, and then be limited to the remaining characters for their starting company. Now the remaining characters here do form that starting company, and once you have this starting company, you may assign up to 2 non-unique minor items to the characters in it. Minor items are just a resource like any other. They indicate minor item on the card, and they do not have any unique wording on them. So these are actually not part of the hazard, or resource rather, limit in your deck. If you have 25 resources, 25 hazards, this will be 26 and 27. They are not considered part of the play deck, but you assign them just the same. So we'll give Aragorn healing herbs, and we'll give Faramir the Horn of Anor. These do, while they do not count toward the deck limit, they do count toward the individual card limit. So if I have healing herbs on Aragorn 2, I may only have 2 other copies of healing herbs in my deck. I can't have this one and the 3 in my deck. There is one last step before your deck is ready to play. In addition to any duplicate characters you've already added to your deck, like Boromir here, you may include up to 10 more character cards. So here are the additional characters I'll be including. Remember that since every character has the unique keyword, you may not have more than 1 of a single character in your deck. You may also not add any characters already in your starting company. And finally, add up to 2 wizards to your deck. There are 5 wizards total. In this one I'm using Alatar and Saruman. These do have the unique keyword, but they are the one exception to the unique rule. If you have 2 of the same wizard, if I had 2 Alatars instead, I could include 2 copies of him in the deck. Or I can include 1 copy of each of 2 wizards, or I can include none at all. So I'll put those in the deck as well. And finally, each game begins with the starting company at Rivendell. So we'll put that location on the table from our site pile to indicate that the company is currently there. Our opponent will do the same. And now we've shown that both companies have started at Rivendell. Next up, shuffle your deck. Draw 8 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. To form your opening hand. Roll the dice to see those first. And you are ready to begin. But that does take us to the end of this video. In the next section, in the next video, I will discuss actually playing the game. But hopefully this has been helpful to you in terms of at least starting out and getting ready. So thank you for watching. I am the CCG Collector, and I'll see you in the next video.